Hey, I'm Scott Phillips, the Motley Fool's Chief Investment Officer in Australia, and welcome to our regular series called What I've Been Reading. As I say to you every week, our team are very smart, thoughtful people, and they're very well read. We figured, you know what, if they're doing the work, if they're learning it anyway, we often talk about it as a team, why not put it on YouTube and share it with you? If you're watching this, you probably care about investing, so hey, why not learn a little bit more about some resources and some lessons that our team have taken from them? And speaking of which, I'm chatting now with Chris Copley. Chris, g'day.
G'day, Scott. How's it going?
Mate, I'm very, very well. I hope you are too. Now, mate, you obviously run our Stars and Stripes service. You work on other services here as well. And this is a book that has been, it's one of the canon, I think. One of the probably, I don't know how many I'd put, top 20 maybe? Business and investing books, I reckon. It's called The Innovators Dilemma by Clayton Christensen, a book that most people have heard of, if not read. But for those who haven't yet read it, tell us what the book is about.
Yeah, so The Innovators Dilemma, it's one I read a little while ago. It's written by Clayton Christensen, and it's certainly a book that I found valuable, and it definitely gave me different ways of thinking about durability and innovation as well. I think one of the most important things for long-term investors is finding businesses which are durable, and you know, one of the biggest characteristics we're looking for in durable businesses is, you know, does the business have strong competitive advantages which should help keep competitors at bay? And across the team, you know, we've all shared a number of write-ups and videos discussing some of the more commonly recognized competitive advantages. But yeah, we've seen, you know, many businesses though that have been widely recognized as quality businesses with attractive competitive advantages, yet still they are later disrupted and then either no longer in business or they, you know, certainly aren't the dominant players which they once were. So why does this happen? This is what the Innovators Dilemma goes into. And in particular, it discusses why market-leading businesses which are well managed, they invest aggressively in new technologies and they're continuing to seek better solutions for their customers, why they can still ultimately be overtaken by another business. And ultimately it comes down to they discuss two different types of technologies. The first is sustaining technologies, which is essentially innovations which improve the performance of an already established product. So think improved safety features in cars, for example, TVs going from LED to OLED displays, solar panels, slowly building in more and more efficiency over time, things like that. The other is disruptive technologies, and this is essentially a technology which brings a different value proposition to customers than what was previously available. So in the vast majority of cases, it's actually the disruptive technology that leads to the downfall of a dominant quality company. And often these disruptive technologies can be, you know, more simple products or sometimes even less technologically advanced than the technology that it's actually disrupting. They may appear in a more niche market but eventually grow into become more mainstream down the track. It's difficult to really lock down any consistent characteristic because every situation is slightly different. But I mean, a few examples they discuss in the book was Xerox. Which was originally it was once a dominant player in the photocopier market. In particular, it made these commercial grade, high volume photocopiers, which, you know, were very popular, but eventually, you know, that they continued to invest in innovation over these years in terms of that high volume photocopier, but they were eventually overtaken by the small tabletop photocopier market. I guess if you think more recent times, you know, streaming services like Netflix, for example, which has overtaken traditional media businesses, is another example. And the book, it goes into list, I guess, a number of reasons why these disruptive technologies can often sneak in and overtake the dominant player as well. And I'll just list a few of them because there's a fair bit in there. But I'll lump the first two together. Small markets don't solve the growth needs of large organizations, and markets that don't exist can't be analyzed. So, you know, often when these technologies are first introduced, the opportunities appear to be a bit more niche. And it often isn't obvious that this new market would grow into the size that it does. And another reason is that the innovation itself might actually make the economic characteristics of their business less appealing. So, you know, in other words, this investment may well cannibalize its own business and produce lower margins. So I think, you know, Xerox is a good example of this. Another which is referenced constantly in throughout the book was the mainframe computer market and also the disk drive market, where for mainframe computers, for example, they're eventually overtaken by less technologically, I guess, advanced mini computers and personal computers, which had lower margins. And one other reason I'll discuss was the functionality of once what was considered a niche technology becomes suitable for the demands of mainstream customers. So I guess a more modern example is EVs were once niche, for example, but now its range and costs are now meeting the needs of mainstream customers. So its adoption is now growing very quickly. So I guess these are a few highlights from the book. The book was written in quite an academic way, so perhaps it may not hook readers in like some others. It was written more than a couple of decades ago as well, but really the key takeaways and everything are just as relevant today as they were in the past. And I think the key takeaways from the book are also really targeted towards those managing business as well, and the ways that you can help prepare for and mitigate the impact of disruptive technologies. So definitely a book I'd recommend.
Fascinating, mate. You know what's really interesting? You say it was written a couple of decades ago. What is amazing about that is you read the book or have read it in the past, and you still see it happen. And so something kind of you was describing the past in some degrees, making some sort of forecast or at least some rules or some methodologies that may continue to exist. And you have seen it since. Even some of the examples you've pointed to there are things that have happened kind of since the book, or at least were only emergent when the book was published, but have continued to prove his point. I'm curious then, mate, let's take it to the investing lens. Obviously, you said it was written for business managers largely. As an investor, did you take anything away from it? If you did, what did you take away? And what can our viewers maybe have a think about or incorporate for themselves when it comes to what they're doing?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think ultimately this book served as a good reminder that things don't always go to plan as well. So you obviously want to minimize owning businesses that are about to be disrupted, but at the same time, often these things cannot be immediately obvious. Like even good management teams with a strong track record of innovation, they can miss what's going to happen, and ultimately that later reduces their dominance. It's probably another good reminder as well, not only ways which we could try to recognize this disruption and why it happens, but that diversification is also extremely important, particularly if you own businesses in areas of rapid innovation. If something can catch industry experts by surprise, it can certainly catch investors as well. I guess a few takeaways that I still apply lots of things that I learned from this in my own investing process today. I think the first thing that I think I apply in my analysis is that the analysis needs to go beyond just determining whether or not you think a certain company ticks the boxes of various competitive advantages. I guess what I do with that is, the first is you try to determine if there are potential disruptive technologies that you can see. This certainly isn't easy, but essentially if you see any businesses in adjacent markets with a product or service that you think over time could potentially, deliver the functionality that your business's customers needs, then that's something to watch out for. The other is I try to determine the industry's innovation profile and exposure to disruption, because determining what the next disruptive technology will be is tough. But instead it's easier to look at a market and determine if in that particular industry, if the company operates in, if it's exposed to rapid innovation cycles. So you can look back at the history of the particular industry to help you understand, I guess, how it's evolved over time, and whether or not that can help provide some insights on the risk of disruption in the industry. And then the final is, does the business invest in its own disruptive technology? So optionality is something that I know we've talked about a lot as well, in various write-ups and videos across the Motley Fool. It's certainly beneficial for your company to have multiple ways in which it can win. I think Amazon's probably a great example of this. If all it ever focused on was just being an online bookstore, who knows if this business would still even be around today. And, originally the concept of AWS, for example, their cloud infrastructure business was, just to help create a more efficient infrastructure for its own operations. And they later leveraged this into what's, the major part of its business today. So it's certainly another example of a disruptive technology. So yeah, I think there's certainly a lot of good takeaways from this book, which continue to help me with my investing today as well.
Right, that is awesome. Thanks so much. I also enjoyed the book very much, but you laid it out beautifully, just what we can learn and how investors can think about how it impacts their portfolios. The Innovators Dilemma by Clayton Christensen. Chris, thanks for sharing your expertise. Fools, thanks for watching. We appreciate you being with us for a little bit of time. We hope you've enjoyed it. If you have, do us a favor, hit the like button down here somewhere. That helps other people find it. And if you want more from us, from Chris, from the rest of the Motley Fool team, do subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell so that YouTube will prompt you when we release a new video. We tend to do it 2 or 3 times a week. So if you want more good stuff from us, and by the way, if it's on YouTube, it's free. So that's a pretty good thing too. Yeah, join us, subscribe, hit the notification bell. And until we speak again, Fool on.